There is a very strange moment that no one prepares you for. It is not when you are being controlled. It is not when you are being diminished. It is the moment you begin to recover. You start to feel solid again. Your voice returns. You stop explaining yourself so much. You make a decision and do not immediately look for approval. And for the first time in a very long time, something inside you feels steady, quiet, unmovable. That is when it happens, not the rage you already survived, not the silence you already learned to sit with. Something else we learn to sit with. Something else, something that feels almost gentle. The person who once made you feel small suddenly softens. They reach out. They say exactly what you once begged to hear. They seem wounded, changed, reflective, and a part of you, a part you thought had already healed, hesitates. Carl Jung understood something about this moment that most people miss entirely. He did not see it as a simple trick or a calculated move. He saw it as a psychological event that targets the most noble parts of who you are, your empathy, your willingness to believe that people can change, your deep instinctive need to offer one more chance. The narcissist does not attack your weakness in this final stage. They appeal to your strength, and that is what makes it so difficult to see. This video does not ask you to harden yourself or stop believing in people. It is here to protect something very specific, the version of you that fought to come back to life. Because there is a pattern that Jung mapped long before the modern world gave it a name. When a person who has lived off your self-doubt realizes that you are no longer available for that role, they do not simply walk away. They adapt. They become softer, more reflective, more vulnerable than you have ever seen them. And if you do not recognize what is happening, you will mistake it for the very thing you have always wanted. If you are watching this and something already feels familiar, it may not be accidental. Perhaps you are standing at the most important threshold of this entire journey. Not the moment you were broken, but the moment you are almost free. Stay until the end, because what comes next does not work on people who are still suffering. It only works on people who have started to heal. And if you have made it this far, some part of you already recognizes what is happening, the false apology and what Jung saw beneath it. When a narcissist realizes that you have begun to stabilize, something very specific shifts in their behavior. The aggression fades, the dismissiveness disappears. In its place comes something you may have never witnessed from this person before. Vulnerability. They admit fault. They use language they never used when you were suffering. I see what I did. I was afraid of losing you. I have been doing a lot of thinking. Each sentence lands in a place inside you that has been starving to hear exactly this. And for a moment, the world seems to correct itself. The person you always believed was in there has finally surfaced. Jung observed that the shadow does not have a fixed form. It adapts. When one strategy of control stops working, the psyche does not surrender. It reorganizes. What was once loud becomes quiet. What was once cold becomes tender. The underlying structure has not changed. Only the surface has shifted to match what you are now capable of responding to. When you were weaker, blunt control worked, anger worked, withdrawal worked. But now that you have built a degree of inner stability, those tools no longer reach you. So the shadow finds the one door still open. Your longing for repair, your hope that the suffering had a purpose, that it was building toward the moment when this person would finally see you. The false apology walks directly through that door. Jung wrote, "The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality." He was not speaking abstractly. He meant that recognizing the shadow in yourself or in another requires you to confront something you deeply wish were not true. In this case, the thing you may not want to face is that the softness you are seeing is not transformation. It is adaptation. The shadow did not dissolve. It learned your new language. A woman once described a moment that stayed with her for years. After months of distance and recovery, her former partner contacted her. He did not ask for anything. He simply said he understood why she left and that she had been right about everything. No pressure, no agenda, just quiet acknowledgement. She said it was the single most disarming moment of the entire relationship, not because he raised his voice, but because he finally lowered it. She went back. Within weeks, the dynamic she had spent a year escaping had quietly reassembled around her. The return never looks like the original. That is why it works, why it targets your capacity to heal. There is a particular kind of person who becomes the repeated target of this pattern. It is almost always someone who, when another person is in pain, cannot look away. Someone who sits with difficult people long after others have left the room. Someone who has a very specific reflex. When they see suffering, they move toward it. Jung connected this to the archetype of the wounded healer, a figure who understands pain because they have lived inside it. This person does not simply feel sympathy. They recognize suffering in others because they carry an intimate knowledge of their own. And it is this recognition that becomes the point of entry. When the narcissist presents themselves as wounded, as reflective, as someone who has finally confronted their own damage, they are speaking directly to the part of you that knows what it costs to do that work. You know how painful self-awareness is. You know how much courage it takes to face yourself. And because you know, you believe them. You are measuring their words against your own experience of genuine transformation. By that measure, they sound real. This is not a flaw in you. It is a deeply moral orientation toward the world. But in this specific dynamic, it becomes the very thing that pulls you back in. The narcissist does not need to understand your psychology. What happens is instinctive. They register what works. When anger stops producing a response, they stop using anger. When guilt stops landing, they stop applying pressure. And when they discover that quiet vulnerability causes you to lean forward, to soften, to reconsider, they move toward that frequency. The shadow adapts the way water finds cracks in stone. It does not need a strategy. It only needs an opening. The cruelty you survived was painful, but it was clear. You could name it, resist it, eventually leave it behind. What you are facing now wears the face of everything you value. When your boundaries become the crime, there is a moment when your refusal to return is treated as an act of aggression. You hold your ground. You do not attack, do not explain excessively, do not retaliate. You simply stay where you are, and the response that comes back, sometimes immediately, sometimes after a calculated silence, reframes your stability as coldness, your clarity as cruelty, your boundaries as abandonment. This is not accidental. Jung distinguished between two very different kinds of guilt. There is genuine moral guilt, the kind that arises when you have truly harmed someone and your conscience signals that repair is needed. And there is neurotic guilt, a guilt that does not come from wrongdoing, but from the violation of an unconscious role you were assigned. You are assigned the role of the one who stays, the one who absorbs, the one who keeps the other person regulated. When you stop performing that role, guilt floods in, not because you did something wrong, but because the psyche still carries the old contract. The narcissist activates this neurotic guilt. They do not say you are cruel in direct terms. They say something quieter. I thought you of all people would understand. I was finally ready to change, and you shut the door. I have no one else. Each statement turns your healing into evidence of your cruelty. There was a man who spent 3 years rebuilding himself after leaving a relationship that had slowly emptied him. He had done the work: therapy, reflection, long stretches of solitude. He was not bitter. He had genuinely moved on. Then a message arrived. She was struggling. She had started to see what she had done. She was not asking him to come back. She just wanted him to know he did not respond. And for weeks he was haunted not by sadness, but by guilt. A voice inside kept asking, what kind of person ignores someone who is suffering? He told a friend he felt like a monster. He had not done anything harmful. He had simply refused to do what he had always done: sacrifice his peace for someone else's comfort. That guilt is the trick. Not the apology, not the tears, not the words. The guilt that follows when you do not respond to them. That is the mechanism, and it operates beneath language, beneath logic. Jung warned that the greatest danger in psychological life is not the external enemy, but the inner voice that has been shaped by someone else's need. When that voice tells you that protecting yourself makes you heartless, you are not hearing your own conscience. You are hearing a voice that was taught to you, one that calls self-preservation selfishness, the rehearsal in softer clothing. If you do go back, what follows will not look like what you escaped. At first, things will feel genuinely different. The conversations will be calmer. The attention will feel more present. There may be gestures that seem to prove change, small acts of consideration that were completely absent before, and you will begin to relax. Not all at once, but gradually, the way a person lowers their guard when the threat seems to have passed. Jung observed that the unconscious does not forget patterns. It stores them, and when conditions are right, it replays them, often in forms subtle enough to bypass conscious recognition. The dynamic does not need to replicate itself exactly. It only needs to reestablish the core structure. One person monitors and adjusts, the other absorbs and forgives. The first sign is usually so small you dismiss it. A comment that lands slightly wrong, a moment where your feelings are acknowledged but subtly redirected. A conversation where you walk away feeling vaguely unsettled but unable to say why. These are not dramatic events. They are calibrations. The dynamic is testing whether the old architecture still holds. Imagine a house that was damaged in a storm. You repaired the walls, replaced the windows, reinforced the foundation. The house looks solid. But if the original ground beneath it was never addressed, the cracks will return, not in the same places, not with the same severity at first, but along the same fault lines because the underlying structure was never truly altered. The rehearsal is not a repetition of the past. It is the past returning in a form you have not yet learned to recognize. Because it looks different, you may spend months inside it before you realize that the air feels familiar, that the weight in your chest has a shape you have carried before, that you are once again editing yourself in small ways you thought you had stopped. Jung called this the regressive restoration of the persona. The self you built during recovery begins to dissolve, not through force, but through slow accommodation. You adjust a little here, silence yourself a little there, and gradually, without a single dramatic incident, you return to the version of yourself you fought so hard to leave behind. The threshold you cannot cross twice. Jung believed that certain moments in psychological life carry a weight that does not repeat itself. He called them threshold moments, points where the psyche stands between two possible futures, and the direction chosen determines the entire shape of what comes after. This is one of those moments. The decision is, in many ways, painfully simple. You either hold your ground or you go back. But what makes this threshold so significant is what you must sacrifice in order to cross it. You are not giving up a person. You are giving up a possibility. the possibility that this person will become who you needed them to be, the possibility that all the pain was leading somewhere redemptive, the possibility that love, if given enough patience, will eventually be returned in the form you deserve. Letting go of that possibility is not a decision of the mind. It is a grief, a physical, slow-moving grief that does not resolve in a single moment of clarity. Jung understood that individuation, the process of becoming fully yourself, always requires a sacrifice, not a sacrifice of comfort or convenience, a sacrifice of something you genuinely love, a version of reality you wanted to be true. And this is what the narcissist unconsciously understands. They are not just offering themselves back to you. They are offering the fantasy back. The story you told yourself during the worst of it, that one day this would all make sense, that one day they would see you, that one day the suffering would be justified by a transformation so real it would erase everything that came before. That story is what you must release. It was never foolish. It was the thing that kept you alive when the situation was unbearable. But it has completed its purpose. And carrying it now is no longer survival. It is captivity. What happens when the trick fails? When you do not go back? When you hold still in the discomfort without acting on it? Something very uncomfortable happens. Nothing. The world does not reward you. There is no immediate sense of victory. There is no closure. The narcissist may escalate, or they may vanish entirely, and both responses leave a strange, hollow feeling. You expected the ending to feel like an ending. Instead, it feels like standing in an empty room after everyone has left. This is what transformation feels like when it is real. Not triumphant, not dramatic, just quiet and disorienting. The discomfort exists because your nervous system was organized around that relationship for a long time. Your body learned to anticipate certain rhythms of tension and relief. When those rhythms stop entirely, the body does not immediately relax. It searches, it scans for the familiar signal, and when it cannot find one, it produces anxiety. The signal it built its rhythms around has disappeared, and the silence is unfamiliar. A man once described the weeks after he refused to re-engage with someone who had controlled him for years. He said the strangest part was not the loneliness, it was the boredom. For so long, his emotional life had been organized around crisis and recovery, rupture and repair, that when the cycle stopped, he did not know what to do with the stillness. He felt guilty for not suffering, as if peace itself were a betrayal. That feeling passes, not quickly, not cleanly, but it passes. And what replaces it is not the opposite of pain. It is something far less dramatic and far more durable, a feeling of being aligned with yourself even though nothing is fully resolved. The central conflict has simply gone quiet, living after the return you did not make. There is a version of your life that exists on the other side of this threshold. It does not look like freedom in the way you might have imagined it. It is not a sudden lightness or a permanent sense of peace. It is slower than that, more ordinary. You wake up, and the first thought in your mind is not about them. Then one morning you realize you cannot remember the last time it was. You make a choice that would have once required their approval, and you do not flinch. You sit in a quiet room, and the silence is not threatening. It is just silence. Jung wrote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." But choosing to become yourself after a relationship that slowly made you unrecognizable to yourself is not a single act. It is a practice, daily, undramatic, and largely invisible to everyone around you. You will not receive recognition for it. The people in your life may never fully understand what it cost you to stay on this side of the threshold. And that is the deepest layer of the work, learning to hold your own value without requiring anyone to witness it. What you are building now does not need to be loud. The inner structure that emerges after you survive this pattern does not announce itself. It does not perform, but it holds. In conversations where you once would have folded, you remain. In moments where you once would have abandoned your position to keep the peace, you stay. Not because you have become hard, but because the center of your life has finally moved inside, and no one can reach it without your permission. There will come a day when you think about this person and feel nothing extraordinary, not anger, not longing, not even relief, just a distant recognition, the way you might remember a storm that passed through years ago. You will know it happened. You will know it was severe, but it will no longer determine the weather.